and welcome to this inaugural edition of Grantwood Country Forum Presents. I am here this evening with Paul C. Juhl, author, historian, and presenter. And we are here at Paul's wonderful home in Iowa City, Iowa, and we are glad to be presenting to you a bit about Paul's background as we go into our next Grantwood Country Forum season, kicking off in January. Now, Iowa City is one of the many key places related to the life and legacy of Iowa's iconic artist son, Grant Wood. And whether or not you know a little, a lot, or nothing, what Paul has to say tonight will no doubt be of interest and give you new perspective and insights, and perhaps inspire you to join us for a conversation and maybe even a little inspiration coming up in the months ahead. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Elaine.
Yes, and first I would like to just show folks kind of several things we've got here to kick it off. We'll weave around with, Paul's got a really interesting background, and so we'll weave around and through and we'll discover some of that, but we've got 3 books here. Can you tell us anything about each of these?
Yes, I can. This was my first book on the artist Grant Wood, and it's called Grant Wood's Clear Lake Summer. And my interest in Grant Wood kind of stems from this first book and the reception that it received. And then I thought about, a lot of people write a lot of things about Grant Wood, but I thought, what are some things that have not been written and not really fully researched? And so I expanded that to what we call Grant Wood Abandoned Plans. And these were projects that Grant maybe partially started or had an idea for, or someone else took his idea and created something from it. This was really a lot of fun to do. And the third one I did just a couple of years ago, and this is about Grant Wood and the Iowa State Fair. And it includes not only information about Grant Wood, but also a lot of information about the other artists of his time period, of mainly the 1930s. So those are the 3 that I've done.
And for those of us who maybe grew up in the area colloquially known as Grant Wood Country, or who has an interest or has family here, you know, we may not have really understood, you know, the illustrious career of this man, all the details of this artist and everybody he encountered and all the things he did. And these books are chock full of those sorts of details. I mean, places and people that you no doubt have heard of, but you didn't know as much about as you would after embracing these. And one thing I want to be sure people understand about Paul is that he not only works within the sphere of Iowa history, he also works with some of the leading scholars who are publishing works related to the life of Grant Wood. And here's a couple of the newer ones. Mm-hmm. And Paul is cited in both of these and is friends with the author, right, as well. And we know that many people use these 2 books in particular as resources when taking a deep dive into all things Grant Wood. Sue Taylor, right, is the most recent book, right?
Right, and the other one is Trip Evans.
Yeah, and can you tell us a little bit about your experience of maybe...
Mm-hmm. I certainly can, Elaine. Most of my contacts all stem from the first book I did, Grant Wood's Clear Lake Summer, and let me give you just a little background on that. Over the years, I always had an interest in Iowa history from the time I was a boy. My family did too. We came from a county seat town, Webster City in Hamilton County. And so when I came to the University of Iowa, I majored in history and in education. During my career as a teacher in public and private schools. In about 1983, I decided that I wanted to collect early photography from Iowa. Photography of the 1870s and 1880s. And a lot of that was done on a format called stereographs. And some of you might remember this from childhood. Maybe a great-grandmother or grandmother had this. You look through here, there's two nearly identical images, and by looking through the lenses, it blends them together in a three-dimensional image. And I talked to antique people, and they said, oh, I don't think any of those have ever been made of Iowa. They said, we've got lots of them here, but they're of the pyramids in Egypt, and they're of South America, and not Iowa. And then in '83, I found my very first stereographs in the town of Bellevue along the Mississippi River, and they were Iowa scenes. So I began collecting not only stereographs, but I collected some small pocket-sized images called carte visite, and also some larger single images called cabinets, and they all came from those 1870s to 1880s. Well, one thing that I soon found out was that the Iowa stereographs, many of them were made in resort communities such as Clear Lake or Okoboji. And the Clear Lake ones, everybody might go for a summer vacation, and they loved having some stereographs to take home, and during the cold winter days of Iowa, they could put them in and relive their nice vacation they had. And that led me to do a book with Mary Bennett, who is at the State Historical Society of Iowa here in Iowa City. And we even included a plastic viewer here in the back so that they could get a stereo effect. And this was published by the University of Iowa Press. Well, since I had a lot of images of Clear Lake, after I finished that book, I decided I would go to Clear Lake and put together a book that I called Clear Lake, the Earliest Images, 1870 to 1880s. And I even took some time living in Clear Lake. It was a familiar town for me. I had gone there when I was a boy for summer vacations. And then as an early teacher, I taught in their public schools and really enjoyed it, and found lots of things that I wanted to include in the book. Made an arrangement with the public library for sales and publicity. But it was during that time period of maybe a year or two that I was putting this all together that I met a couple, John and Marlis Perkins. And John became a friend, and in the course of our conversations, he said to me, well, you know, Grant Wood was here during the last summer of his life. And he said, and we did a lot of things with him that summer. And I thought to myself, oh, how interesting is that? I wonder how many other people would have a remembrance of that time. Now, John and Marlis were already in their 90s. They lived on North Shore Drive and lived only about 2 houses from where Grant Wood had spent the summer with his secretary, Park Reinert, and best friend, Park Reinert. And so John began to tell me all kinds of stories about Grant Wood. Well, I started to read some of the early biographies of Grant Wood, and usually they would say things like, and he spent the last summer of his life in Clear Lake, Iowa, period. And I thought, hey, I know a lot about that story, and I need to record it in a spiral-bound book. And so that kind of started me on the tale of Grant Wood.
Well, and there's just so many rabbit holes. We know from those of us who've gathered online in the winter, these last couple winters, we know that these stories just spark a connection upon a connection upon a connection.
Very true.
And that's part of what makes it so delightful to gather and do that. And Paul is so helpful and so knowledgeable of how to connect all those dots, whether it's to to some scholarship or to some locals or through some other historical societies. Just lots of connections that he's made over time that really enriches our experience together. And one experience that I know he shares with Grant Wood is related to one-room schoolhouses.
Yes.
So, do
Well,
tell.
As Elaine is saying here, not only did I expand into 3 books on Grant Wood, but I did 13 of the Spiral-Bound books about Iowa history. And one of them was about my own country schoolhouse, Washington number 1 in Webster County, Iowa. And that led me to meet a lot of people. I still attend the country school conference each summer. This summer it was in Cedar Falls. And yes, Grant and I shared that experience because he went to a country school too. And I should add, I didn't quite finish what I was saying there, Elaine, in terms of Tripp Evans and Sue Taylor that wrote the most recent books. That is how I got to meet them, was by doing the Spiral-Bound book on Grant Wood's Clear Lake Summer. When they came to town to research here all around the area in Jones County, Johnson County, and Lynn County, they called on me to help them find the spots, and they got a lot of information out of this Spiral-Bound book to use in their own research.
And that makes Paul just this wonderful connector from scholars who didn't necessarily grow up here, but Paul being an Iowan, but also having some international and some experience with history throughout his entire life, is able to kind of connect some of those dots, and then also assist while we all reach together into our own family trees, because our lively forum that happens over the course of 8 weeks every year, we find people who have story upon story upon story. And the one thing that is so meaningful to me, Paul, is to have us gathering in that format and have the time to exchange conversation where we can we can engage in, like, oh yeah, I read what Sue Taylor said about Grant Wood about this, or about Nan, or about their growing up, and I didn't know that. But I don't agree with this maybe, or I'm like, I'm skeptical of this. And so there's that local connection, that local sense of what life was like. And so just, I think there's something that Paul is able to lend to the scholars, but also with us when we gather as well. And so it kind of makes everybody feel like they're part of that Grant Wood story. And those of us who gather can really piece some of those things together, because obviously all of us who gather are not all scholars. A lot of us are just people who have family who grew up in the area. Sure. And we don't necessarily study and write books like Paul does, but we're able to see a Grant Wood painting and say, oh yeah, life, that reminds me of this that happened. Life was like that, you know, or I think he was going down, or I think he was romanticizing something there, or, you know.
Well, I've always felt this was true with the group we put together. We've used a term before, seeing Grant Wood through Iowans' eyes. Yes. And I really think that's true, that people come in from the East and the West Coast, and I don't think they can ever totally grasp what we have grown up in. And there were a lot of aspects of Grant Wood's life that I saw in my own family background, the homes of my great aunts and uncles and great grandfather and great grandmother. His life was probably very much like that. Mm-hmm. And the same values, the same sense of morality in terms of rights and wrongs. And so I always felt a closeness. It wasn't just the country school, but we were both born on farms. We went to country school. I lived in Cedar Rapids too, and also Iowa City. So there was a bond that was created for me, even in my 13 books, which are about other topics totally. I still go back to Grant Wood because of some kind of a close feeling there with him.
Well, and I know that feeling is shared.
Yes,
by,
I think it is.
By a lot of folks who grew up in this area. Grant Wood, of course, was born in Anamosa, is buried there. Moved to Cedar Rapids when he was 10 after his father died, and they needed to be able to support themselves. He was fortunate to be talented and also find patrons there. There's just some things about societal norms and the way the customs and kind of sensibilities of the people of that time that many of us hear those stories of the generations before us.
Right.
That are passed down. Grant Wood, born in 1891, died in 41. 42. There you go. And so it's important to me too that we, as we're doing this forum and when we revisit the past, we got to be pretty careful because the context is much different. And so that'll be part of what we're going to do this year coming up is we're going to go deeper into the kind of the societal norms of city life, of country life, of what it was like to be a woman in the era of Grant Wood country. And so how all these things affected Grant Wood's life, some of the women that he surrounded himself that were in his life and were also part of his art-related life. We'll be talking about that, a couple of the paintings, appraisal this year, I think, in Daughters of Revolution, which is provocative in myriad ways that will allow us to talk both locally and nationally.
Yes.
That's one of the things I'm excited about this year is to both appraisal and Daughters of Revolution, which we're going to be focusing on, has that capacity to go broadly into what was happening in the world and in the nation and in Iowa at that time, and how has that changed now, and how we have to be careful when we look back and interpret. Having said that, we like to be inspired by it as well, because a lot of us pine for a simpler time when things get complicated, right?
That's right.
We want things to be a little bit easier to deal with. But anyway, besides all the Grant Wood things, Paul is also, he's written many articles. And I'd like to have you mention some of the places where you've written some articles.
Yes, I have. Iowa Heritage Illustrated, and I've done some work there. The magazine Stereo World, I've had a couple of articles published there. The old palimpsest, I've had some publishing done there. My whole goal here in terms of my life is, with my collection of photographs and any of the writings that I do, I'm just hopeful that years down the road there might be young researchers who come across some of that and can take it even a step further or feel good in terms of a reassurance that the provenance of whatever they're working on is correct. So that's my whole idea. My photo collection will go to the State Historical Society, and that will open up for a lot of researchers who might be doing a paper or a book, an image that just is a perfect image to complete their article or their book.
Well, I think that's just so meaningful, and it's exciting to know that what you've collected and put so much heart and effort into will have a good home and will be able to be carried forward.
Yes, and it will, I'm sure.
And that's and so I do want to mention that some of your other books had interesting topics to them,
Yes.
like Abraham Lincoln.
Right. The Abraham Lincoln grandchildren. Robert, his only son to live to maturity, had 3 children, and they spent their summers in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, because their mother was from Mount Pleasant, Robert's wife. And that's a good story in itself. So I did one on Abraham Lincoln's grandchildren. I did one on Sarah Bernhardt, which for anybody who knows who Sarah is, they'll be quite surprised that there's a possibility of an Iowa connection there because she was a famous French actress. I did one on Frank Lloyd Wright and his Iowa connections, buildings that used his plans that were built here in Iowa. And Louis Sullivan's buildings are part of that book too. So kind of an assortment of various topics.
Yeah, yeah. And so if there's anything that you would want people to know about what you're doing now?
Well, right now I do a weekly column for Lost Clear Lake, Iowa. That's a Facebook group. And they came to Clear Lake, it's titled. And I've done 20 weeks now of people who came to Clear Lake at some point and left some record of that. And so it's a variety of people from Dizzy Dean to Aunt Jemima to Billy Sunday to William Jennings Bryan. A lot of people came and went from Clear Lake. And I'd done that research some years ago, but never put it all together. And then I found that online was really the perfect spot for that. And I think the people of Clear Lake are enjoying it. And I'm also continuing some research on Grant Wood. That never really ends. And most recently, I did a spiral-bound book on Herbert Hoover and his wife Lou Henry Hoover, both of whom were born in Iowa. Herbert, of course, was born in West Branch, and Lou Henry was born in Waterloo. And they returned to Iowa right between the time in which he was nominated for the Republican candidacy for presidency and the election. They spent 3 days, and my book is about the 3 days they spent there. And I recently last week in fact, did a Zoom for the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum.
Well, that's really exciting too. So I hope folks who are seeing this interview will share it freely, to share what a great resource we have in Paul, and because he's such a generous spirit when it comes to history, and I think we all know that when we start sharing our stories, it just deepens the experience not only of the content but of just all the people you meet along the way.
Certainly.
And
I'd say that's the most outstanding part of all of this collecting and writing is the people that I've had contact with. Such interesting people, and I really appreciate anything they help me with or encourage me on. I'm thankful.
well, I'm thankful for you to be part of our group, and I hope that whoever's watching this will consider popping into our Grant Wood Country forum starting January 9th. You could go to the Cedar Rapids Public Library website and get a register for free, and join us for a session, 2 or all 8, and just start the conversation and see where it leads. That's the joy and fun, and it's been joyful and fun to chat with you.
Thank you.
Paul Juhl.